What's your reaction now that it seems real and done?
So there are a few things that are happening all at once. The one is that there's a lot of political jostling in order to get this deal through. And it creates short-term confusion because it kind of immediately changes the subsidy regime, changes the rules around it, and that's going to create a little bit of confusion in the near term. It does correct for some of the things that were problematic in the pre-existing EV subsidies, that they were effectively regressive, that wealthy people were the ones that could afford high-end, Hummer EVs and Teslas, and yet, those aren't necessarily the people you want to be subsidizing with tax dollars. Now the bill is shifting the thresholds for who qualifies and which vehicles qualify to be more focused on the middle class, but it is still fundamentally regressive in a sense.
Well, why do you believe? I think your school of thought is that it misses the point that actually there's a much broader section of the global automotive market that needs attention, that needs more support to electrify.
Well, it's not just the automotive market. I think what you need to think about is what is the point of cars? They move people and they, to some extent, move goods. Especially if somebody's going to Walmart or something, they're holding stuff in their vehicle. But what we should be focusing on if we care about climate, and the two things that are tension in this bill, and we can get to them, one is America first, like these policies around American manufacturing, et cetera.
Yes.
And the other is around climate. But if you care about that second bucket, the climate bucket, what you care about is not electrifying vehicles, not making cars that people own that drive 4% of the time electric, but rather electrifying miles. And the miles that really matter are the ones that are driven by fleets of various kinds, whether it's commercial fleets, trucks, delivery vans, but also fleets like scooter fleets in cities like San Francisco, which are also high utilization. And also for delivery of food, a company like DoorDash is doing 1.6 billion trips a year. Why isn't there a focus on commercializing those trips and subsidizing those trips through these kinds of subsidies?
So a big focus on the consumer. I want to bring Bloomberg's Kyle Stock into the conversation. And Kyle, give us a sense of where we're at in electrification in America. You wrote a fantastic story last week that basically points out that if you're anywhere in the States, but on the West Coast, for example, and you want to take a road trip, a classic American road trip in an EV, it's not that easy. Talk me through it.
Well, I think EV adoption is sort of ahead of where the narrative is. I think Americans are open to these vehicles, but the charging infrastructure here is still a big challenge. We lag China, Europe, South Korea, even Japan when it comes to the number of places to charge a vehicle quickly if you're outside of the Tesla universe. So that's because we haven't had subsidies like this in the past. We haven't had, robust policy like they have in Scandinavia and in China to really put these cords out there in the wild, and not just at, Whole Foods or the gym or your office, but at a national park, at the Grand Canyon. That's still kind of off the map for someone taking an EV road trip right now. So, this bill speaks to that, but Biden's giant infrastructure package also speaks to that. $5 billion that's going to start to be deployed this autumn should help cover a lot of those EV deserts, but we're not really there yet in terms of where you can go in these vehicles.
The other area is this whole energy crisis and the motivation to move to EVs. In your reporting in recent weeks and months, what do you see in the US consumer in terms of their willingness to transition to EVs, their ability to afford an EV?
The affordability is a huge chunk of it. I mean, these cars they were expensive to begin with. They're getting more expensive now because of the supply crisis, because dealerships can add on these market adjustment rates. And even if you're paying a sticker price, you're waiting months for one of these cars. So that's a big issue. A big thing in the bill that is going through now is a provision for a rebate for used EVs. And this is massive. Like, anyone in the EV universe is thrilled about this because in America, 70 to 80% of cars that are purchased are pre-owned. So this is the lion's share of the market. So to sort of have something that speaks to that buyer could move the needle drastically for the space.
So that's the kind of consumer side of the story from Kyle. And again, you know, your point is that we shouldn't just focus on cars. So if I said to you, here's a pen, go back and rewrite the bill as you would have written it, what would you have put in there to hit those targets, reducing emissions and advancing a transition to sustainable energy?
Yeah, I think the focus on, you know, going to a national park or something like that is not how people actually use cars. Cars are designed today for a family to go to a picnic, right, and have all this trunk space and all the kids in the car. But in reality, most of the vehicles are actually being used to commute, or they're being used for trips that people take for retail. And usually there's only one person driving that car. And so I wrote a book, and the book is basically about the transition to what I call the trip economy. Basically these trip marketplaces that bring things to you or take you places. Uber, Amazon, DoorDash, these are all different ways in which you can buy trips for specific purposes. And this trip economy rationalizes all the inefficiencies of car ownership. Car ownership is extremely wasteful. Think about all the metal that's being moved all the way to take you anywhere that you're going that's just unnecessary. And the real opportunity is to not electrify the energy that's being used to move all that weight, but actually to change how much energy is needed in the first place to move people and goods for the economic purposes of growing the economy, et cetera. So if I were to rewrite the bill, I'd be focused on those kinds of opportunities. Focus on commercial fleets and how do you accelerate electrification. If you look at where electrification is really happening today, it's buses in cities. They've already, close to 50% of those buses have already transitioned. If you look at Amazon, you mentioned Rivian before, they made a massive purchase of Rivian vehicles, and that's really what is the tailwind behind Rivian.
Right.
Those are the use cases that really have rapid adoption, and those vehicles are the ones that are doing high amounts of miles. DoorDash is using e-bikes in many cities to deliver goods, and they're bundling the packages that are being delivered. So you don't have to, instead of having consumers take individual trips to a store, you've got multiple trips being bundled into one ride. And similarly with Uber, you're seeing in London under pressure from TfL that Uber is actually much more quickly electrifying than consumer fleets. So that's if you want to shift miles to electrification,
right.
those are the things you should be focusing on.